The private dining room, reserved for their party, lay at the rear of the establishment, separated by a frosted glass partition that muffled the outside world while allowing slivers of light to dance across the threshold. As Aubrey and Ethan approached, the door stood slightly ajar, revealing the scene within. Tessa, her older sister by 3 years, occupied the center of the long rectangular table like a monarch surveying her domain. Her blonde hair was styled in loose waves that shimmered under the pendant lights, and her makeup was flawless, accentuating the sharp angles of her face. She sat with an air of entitled ease, one hand resting lightly on the stem of a water glass, the other occasionally gesturing as she spoke. Beside her, her husband Doug nursed a whiskey neat, the amber liquid swirling lazily in the crystal tumbler, his broad shoulders relaxed in a tailored button-down shirt. Ethan slid into the seat to Aubrey's immediate right, his movements deliberate and careful as he unfolded his napkin and placed it across his lap. The table was set with an array of silverware that gleamed under the lights, multiple forks, knives, and spoons arranged in precise order, a testament to the restaurant's commitment to formality. Aubrey leaned close to her son, her voice dropping to a whisper intended solely for his ears, a private sanctuary in the midst of the gathering. "You can order anything you want, sweetheart," she murmured, her tone infused with encouragement and love. Ethan's eyes scanned the menu, lighting upon the children's section where the chicken tenders were listed simple, safe, a child's uncomplicated choice in a menu dominated by excess and extravagance. The description promised crispy breading, accompanied by fries and a side of honey mustard, evoking a sense of normalcy that Aubrey hoped would shield him from the undercurrents she sensed brewing. Before Aubrey could raise her hand to signal the waiter, a young man in a crisp white shirt and black vest who hovered discreetly near the partition, Tessa leaned forward across the table, her manicured finger extending to push the woven bread basket toward Ethan. The basket contained an assortment of rolls and breadsticks, still warm from the oven, their crusts golden and inviting. "We didn't order for him," Tessa said, her tone calm and almost kind, as if delivering a polite observation rather than a pointed slight. She paused for effect, her eyes flicking briefly to their mother before adding, "Mom thought he's a picky eater anyway." The words were delivered with the precision of a scalpel, slicing through the veneer of civility that Aubrey had so carefully maintained for 35 years. They landed in the space between them, heavy and undeniable, exposing the raw favoritism that had defined their family dynamic. Aubrey felt the impact deep within her chest, a sharp incision through the armor she had forged from resilience and restraint. Her father chuckled then, a low, rumbling sound that carried the weight of decades of similar dismissals, his eyes crinkling at the corners in what passed for amusement. "You should have packed him something," he added casually, as if the suggestion were practical rather than condescending. Meanwhile, Tessa's children continued to gnaw on butter-slathered breadsticks, their small hands greasy, awaiting entrees that would easily surpass $100 each, filet mignon for the older boy, lobster tail for the younger. Choices that reflected not necessity but indulgence. Ethan, in contrast, stared at the cold bread in the basket, his shoulders curling inward slightly, the navy blazer suddenly appearing too large for his diminutive frame, swallowing him in a way that made him seem even more vulnerable. Aubrey's mother gazed into her water glass, watching the ice cubes shift and melt like tiny glaciers calving into the sea, her expression one of studied detachment. No one else spoke. The jazz melody continued its oblivious serenade, a saxophone solo weaving through the tension. The room's other occupants, Uncle Frank and Aunt Laura, who had arrived late and taken seats at the far end, remained silent for the moment, though Aubrey sensed their watchful presence. Something inside her, a fracture that had been widening imperceptibly over years of swallowed words and unacknowledged pain, finally gave way. It was not a dramatic shatter, no explosion of emotion that would have fit the script of familial melodrama. Rather, it was a quiet, inexorable split, like ice-forming cracks beneath the surface of a frozen lake. She smiled then, a small and controlled movement of her lips that did not extend to her eyes, which remained steady and unyielding. "Noted," she said, the single word emerging with deliberate clarity, falling into the heavy silence like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples that disturbed the composure of everyone at the table. Every head turned in her direction. Tessa blinked rapidly, her confusion evident in the slight furrow of her brow. Her father paused mid-bite, then returned his attention to his steak as if nothing of consequence had occurred. But Ethan Dear, observant Ethan, looked at her fully, his shy and serious gaze meeting hers without flinching. In that moment, Aubrey saw understanding dawn in his young eyes, a recognition that his mother was no longer willing to absorb the blows, to smooth over the inequities with her trademark patience. The waiter returned shortly thereafter, his notepad poised at the ready, his professional smile unwavering despite the palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. "Are we all set to order?" he inquired politely, his voice cutting through the thickened air heavy with unspoken grievances and long-simmering resentments. Aubrey rose from her seat without hesitation, the legs of her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that echoed sharply, silencing even the distant clink of silverware from adjacent tables. The motion drew every eye, commanding the room in a way she had never allowed herself before. "Actually," she said, her voice steady as winter's steel forged in the fires of endurance, "cancel any orders that haven't yet reached the kitchen. Everything already en route goes on my father's tab. It is his anniversary, after all." The waiter froze in place, his pen hovering above the notepad, uncertainty flickering across his features. Tessa's jaw slackened visibly, her practiced poise fracturing for the first time that evening. Her father's fork remained suspended midair, a perfectly seared piece of Wagyu beef trembling on the tines, juices pooling beneath it. Aubrey continued, her demeanor unruffled, her words measured and precise. "And for my son, he'll have the ribeye medium rare, with truffle fries and a Coke. Make it quick, please." The waiter nodded, his eyes widening slightly in comprehension or perhaps admiration, before he turned on his heel and disappeared through the service door, leaving the room in a stunned hush. The remainder of the dinner unfolded in a brittle, uncomfortable silence that hung over the table like a pall. Tessa's boys, sensing the shift but too young to fully grasp its implications, began to whine about the delay in their food, their voices rising in petulant crescendos that grated on the nerves. Aubrey's father sawed at his steak with unnecessary force, the knife scraping against the plate in rhythmic aggression, his jaw set in a line of suppressed fury. Her mother attempted to interject with brittle smiles and forced pleasantries, her voice cracking whenever she tried to steer the conversation toward neutral territory, the weather, perhaps, or the quality of the wine, but her efforts fell flat, absorbed into the void. The jazz continued its indifferent melody, a counterpoint to the human drama playing out beneath the chandeliers. When the check finally arrived, presented on a small silver tray with the restaurant's embossed logo, the waiter placed it directly before Aubrey's father without a moment's hesitation, as per her earlier instruction. His face flushed a deep crimson, the color rising from his collar to the tips of his ears, but he uttered not a single word of protest. He simply retrieved his wallet from his pocket, extracted a credit card with deliberate slowness, and handed it over. The transaction was completed in silence, the machine's beep the only sound breaking the tension. As the party rose to leave, chairs pushing back in a discordant chorus, Aubrey reached into the gift bag that had sat forgotten beside her. Her fingers closed around the frame, the glass cool and smooth under her touch. She withdrew the restored photograph, sepia tones meticulously preserved, edges smoothed and repaired, capturing her parents in their youth, smiling with the unbridled optimism of a world still full of promise. The image was beautiful, a snapshot of a time before the hierarchies, before the favoritism that had poisoned the well. She set it gently on the table in front of them, the wood thudding softly under its weight. "Happy anniversary," she said, her voice soft but resonant, carrying the finality of closure. Then, without another glance, she took Ethan's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in quiet solidarity, and walked out of the room, through the main dining area where patrons glanced up curiously, past the host stand and the bar with its array of glittering bottles, the soft jazz still playing as if nothing of consequence had transpired. The night air outside hit them like a cleansing wave, sharp and invigorating after the stifling warmth of the restaurant. The parking lot was dimly lit by street lamps, the asphalt still radiating the day's heat. Ethan squeezed her fingers tightly, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mom?" It was tentative, serious, laced with the weight of a child who had witnessed more than his years should allow. Aubrey smiled down at him, the first genuine expression of the evening, warmth spreading across her features like dawn breaking over the horizon. "Yeah, baby." "You weren't scared," he observed, his tone a mix of awe and affirmation. "No," she replied, the words simple yet profound. "I was done." They walked to the car in companionable quiet, the gravel crunching under their shoes, the stars beginning to prick the velvet sky above. Aubrey helped Ethan into his booster seat, buckling him in with the care of routine, before sliding into the driver's side. The engine hummed to life, and as they pulled away from the steakhouse, the building reckied in the rearview mirror, its amber lights fading into memory. By the time they arrived home, a modest two-bedroom house in Tempe with a small yard and a lemon tree out front, Aubrey had tucked Ethan into bed, his eyelids heavy from the emotional exertion of the evening. His room was a haven of boyish order, posters of space exploration on the walls, a bookshelf filled with chapter books and graphic novels, a model rocket on the dresser. She kissed his forehead, whispering goodnight, and closed the door softly behind her. Her phone, left on the kitchen counter, glowed insistently with missed calls, her mother's name appearing multiple times, Tessa's, and one long voicemail from her father. She did not listen to any of them. She knew the script by heart. Accusations of embarrassment, claims of scene-making, declarations that the dinner had been ruined. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water from the tap, the liquid cool and refreshing as it slid down her throat. She sank onto the couch in the living room, the cushions enveloping her like an old friend, and let the quiet settle around her like dust after a long-awaited storm. The house felt profoundly safe in that moment. No voices overlapping hers, no subtle digs to deflect, no expectations to manage or fulfill. It was hers and Ethan's, a space carved out from the chaos. Then another buzz from the phone shattered the peace. A text from Tessa, the screen illuminating her sister's name, * you owe Dad for dinner. $1,200. Pay your share, *. Aubrey stared at the message for a long minute, the words blurring slightly as a wave of exhaustion and resolve washed over her. She typed a single word in response, noted. Her thumb hovered over the send button, but she did not press it. There was no need. The message was for her own satisfaction, a private affirmation that the line had been drawn. The next morning dawned bright and unrelenting, the Arizona sun streaming through the kitchen windows as Aubrey prepared breakfast, scrambled eggs for Ethan, toast with avocado for herself. A knock at the door came sooner than expected, sharp and insistent. She opened it to find her parents and Tessa standing on the porch, unannounced as was their custom, their expressions a tableau of indignation and entitlement. Her father clutched a white envelope in his hand, his knuckles white from the grip. Her mother's lips were pressed into a thin white line, her eyes starting nervously. Tessa stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, oversized sunglasses perched atop her head despite the overcast sky that promised rain later in the day. Ethan glanced up at his mother, his expression a mixture of uncertainty and budding wonder, unsure whether it was permissible to smile in the face of such boldness. Aubrey reached for a breadstick from the basket, breaking it cleanly in half with a soft snap, and handed one piece to him. "Eat, honey," she whispered, her voice a gentle anchor amid the storm she had just unleashed. "We're fine." The simple act, the offering of sustenance on her own terms, felt like a declaration of sovereignty. Doug cleared his throat then, the sound grating against the silence like sandpaper on wood, his face flushed with a mix of discomfort and indignation. Was that really necessary? He demanded, his tone laced with the authority of someone accustomed to deference. Aubrey met his gaze directly, her eyes calm as a frozen lake under a clear winter sky, reflecting back his own unease. Yes, she replied simply, the word carrying the weight of finality. It was. From the far end of the table, Uncle Frank let out a low, appreciative chuckle, the sound rumbling from deep in his chest like distant thunder. He was a burly man in his late 60s, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by much anymore. Aunt Laura, seated beside him, met Aubrey's eyes across the expanse of white linen and flickering candlelight, her gaze proud and knowing, filled with the quiet strength of a woman who had navigated her own battles. She nodded once, a silent benediction that spanned 35 years of waiting, of hoping for this moment when Aubrey would finally claim her voice. "Can we come in?" her mother asked, already stepping forward as if the invitation was a formality. Aubrey moved aside without a word, her silence a barrier more effective than any protest. The trio filed into the living room, their footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. Ethan was already up, seated on the couch with his Nintendo Switch in hand, his fingers pausing the game as he glanced up briefly. His eyes met Aubrey's for a fleeting moment, acknowledgement, understanding, before returning to the screen. He knew the script all too well, had lived through enough variations to recognize the patterns. Her father placed the envelope on the kitchen counter with a deliberate thud, the sound echoing in the open space. "That's the bill from last night," he said, his voice gruff and authoritative. "You agreed to pay half." "You didn't." "No," Aubrey interrupted, her interruption not loud but absolute. "I'm being done. Done carrying the load, done making excuses, done pretending this is normal." She slid the folder of evidence forward, fanning the papers slightly for emphasis, proof of every payment to Tessa, screenshots of pleading messages ignored, even a note from Ethan's school counselor confirming that he was thriving despite the family's concern. Reports. Her mother's face drained of all color, her hand dropping to her side. Her father clenched his jaw, the muscle ticking visibly. Tessa was trembling now, her earlier bravado crumbled. "You're pathetic," she spat, her voice cracking with emotion. "Dragging everyone down because you can't stand not being the favorite, because you've always had to be the perfect one." Aubrey stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her sister's eyes, the ones that had once looked to her for guidance in childhood. "You were always the favorite, Tessa. You just mistook it for love. Love doesn't come with conditions, with constant bailouts without accountability. Love doesn't diminish one child to elevate another." The room went utterly quiet, the words hanging in the air like a verdict. Frank nodded once, his expression one of finality. "That's it. We're done here." Aubrey walked to the front door, opening it wide and holding it there, the morning light spilling in. It took them a few seconds to process, but eventually they filed out, her father first, muttering something unintelligible under his breath about ingratitude, her mother next, her eyes wet with unshed tears or perhaps regret, Tessa last, shooting a final glare over her shoulder that held no power. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Aubrey turned the lock, the mechanism engaging with satisfying finality, and leaned her forehead against the cool wood for a moment, breathing deeply, allowing the adrenaline to ebb. Her phone buzzed almost immediately on the counter, a voicemail from an unknown number. She hit play, the speaker crackling to life. "This is the Department of Child Services. We received an anonymous report concerning your son, Ethan. We'd like to schedule a home visit at your earliest convenience." She froze, the blood draining from her face, but only for a moment. By the time the knock came 2 hours later, the house was immaculate, every surface wiped down, the fridge stocked with fresh produce and healthy snacks, Ethan's room straightened with military precision, his drawings proudly displayed on the refrigerator with magnets shaped like stars. The two caseworkers, both women in their 40s with kind eyes and clipboards, were professional and thorough. They asked gentle questions about routines, school, emotional well-being. They smiled at Ethan's art, complimented the home's warmth. Before leaving, one of them pulled Aubrey aside and whispered, "We can tell this was a misunderstanding. You'd be surprised how often family does this, uses the system to punish rather than protect." Aubrey wasn't surprised. Not anymore. That night, after Ethan was asleep, she gathered everything in a large accordion folder: the bank statements, the message screenshots, the CPS report once it arrived marked unfounded, and one additional item: a letter she had discovered months ago tucked in a box in the garage, her mother's handwriting on yellowed paper dated 35 years prior. Asterisk, I don't think I'll ever bond with this second child. I'm too tired to try. Asterisk, she read the line over and over until the words blurred with tears she refused to let fall, scanning it into her computer for safekeeping. The next morning, she called Karen, Aunt Laura's lawyer friend, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for tenacity. They filed for a formal cease and desist order against her parents and Tessa, citing harassment, defamation, and the false CPS report. Karen was efficient, her questions probing, her outrage on Aubrey's behalf genuine. A week later, a letter arrived from the family's attorney. They were petitioning for grandparent visitation rights, claiming Aubrey was denying them access to Ethan out of spite, that it was in the child's best interest to maintain the relationship. Karen read it and smirked, her eyes gleaming with battle lust. Arizona law won vehemently back them without a showing of harm to the child from lack of contact, and they have none. But let's make sure they regret even trying this. They filed a comprehensive response, attaching the mountain of evidence: the unfounded CPS report, the payment trail proving financial exploitation, the decades-old letter revealing the root of the favoritism. 3 days later, the case was dismissed with prejudice, the judge's order citing lack of standing and clear evidence of bad faith. When Aubrey told Ethan, sitting with him on the porch swing as the sun set, he just nodded, processing. So they can't bother us anymore? Not anymore, honey, she said, ruffling his hair. He smiled then, small but real, a weight lifting from his young shoulders. That evening, as he colored at the kitchen table, vibrant markers bringing a spaceship to life on paper, he looked up. You seem different, Mom. I am, she admitted. I stopped trying to fix things that weren't broken by me. I stopped letting their version of family define ours. He leaned against her shoulder, the warmth of his body a comfort, and continued coloring. The air in the house was still, peaceful, unmarred by external demands. Weeks later, Aubrey and Ethan drove north to Prescott, the landscape shifting from desert scrub to pine-dotted hills. They set up a small camp by the lake, a tent, sleeping bags, a portable stove. They roasted marshmallows over a crackling fire, the smoke curling into the night sky, watching the flames dance and pop. The stars above were endless, a canopy untouched by the turmoil they had left behind in the valley. Ethan turned to her, his face illuminated by the firelight, his voice soft. You seem lighter, Mom. She smiled, the flames reflecting in her eyes like captured sunlight. That's what freedom feels like, sweetheart. For the first time in years, she wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was just free to parent without interference, to live without apology, to love without conditions. A chance encounter at the grocery store a week after the dismissal underscored the shift. Aubrey pushed her cart down the produce aisle, selecting ripe avocados, when she spotted her mother by the apples. She looked smaller, somehow older, her shoulders hunched as she compared prices with feigned concentration. Their eyes met briefly across the bins. Her mother opened her mouth as if to speak, but Aubrey offered no opening, no smile of reconciliation. She simply walked past, her cart wheels humming softly on the linoleum. No pause, no effort to make her mother comfortable. It was a small act, but monumental in its indifference. At home, Ethan was on the porch reading a book about astronauts, the sunset painting his face in hues of gold and orange. The world felt expansive, possibilities infinite. Peace, finally, was theirs alone to keep, a hard-won sanctuary built on boundaries and self-respect.